Have you ever felt like you were living a life that wasn't really yours? It was as if every day you woke up, put on a familiar shell, repeated the same actions, the same words, the same smiles, all right roles, right places, but something deep inside kept screaming, "This is not me." The feeling was subtle, but it was also impossible to ignore. It was like a tiny crack in the mirror of life, not shattering, but enough to distort everything. You go to work, you interact, you reply to messages, you fulfill all the social roles you were taught to do well. But when you're alone, when there's no more outside noise, the familiar question comes back, who am I? And more importantly, is this life I'm living really mine? The question wasn't a coincidence. Carl Jung believed that feeling disconnected from yourself was not an isolated crisis. It is a common, profound, and alarming symptom, a sign that we are living in the wrong way, in the wrong direction, incompatible with the true nature of our souls. From a young age, we have been taught to be good people according to other people's standards. Be good, be polite, be good, be suitable. Every word, every look, every action of adults, of teachers, of society, gradually engraves in our minds a script of life. What should be, what should not be. And from some point, we no longer live as ourselves, but as an approved version, a draft edited by others. Have you ever wondered, the thoughts you have, the goals you pursue, the things you believe to be right, how much of them are truly yours, and how much of them are something someone has planted in you for so long that you think it is you? We have learned to wear masks. Jung called it persona, the social mask we are forced to wear to survive and be accepted. That mask helps us fit in, but also makes us lose the most precious thing, the truth within ourselves. The scariest thing is not that we are living a fake life. It is that we have lived a fake life for so long that we think it is real. We get used to not asking questions, get used to following, get used to ignoring the little voice inside us. And then, one day, we no longer recognize who we are. And this is the most dangerous thing. A life that does not belong to you will never make you happy. You can have success, you can have money, you can be admired by others, but deep inside, there is still a void that cannot be filled, because you are living someone else's life, in your own name. But the happy truth is that that feeling of being lost, the feeling of confusion, emptiness, dissatisfaction, even though the outside is fine, is a signal. It doesn't come to torment you, but to call you back. It is the whisper of your true self, saying, "Stop, it's time to go home." The question is, are you willing to face that feeling? Are you willing to stop, look deep inside, and ask yourself, who am I? Not in the eyes of others, but in the most honest silence of your soul. If the answer is yes, then this journey is for you. And in the next part, we will step into the first concept, persona, the most sophisticated mask we ever wear, and also where all journeys to find ourselves begin. When you were a child, you were a whole person, an unmodified, unprogrammed child. You screamed when you were angry, cried when you were sad, laughed when you were happy. But then very quickly, you began to learn an important lesson. Not all emotions are allowed to be expressed. Not all people are accepted. And if you want to be loved, to be recognized, to be safe in the eyes of others, you must learn to hide yourself. You learned to be silent when you were treated unfairly. Learn to smile even when you were angry. Learn to hide your weaknesses, to pretend to be strong. You became a tuned version, programmed to fit expectations. And little by little, you began to put on masks. Jung called it persona. Persona is not fake, It is an essential part of living in society. Without it, we cannot interact, cannot exist in the community. But here's the thing, we've become synonymous with our mask. We don't just wear it, we become it. Have you ever felt like you behave differently around different groups of people? At work, a neat, composed person. At home, a different version, maybe pleasant, maybe grumpy. On social media, a perfect, inspiring image. But when there's no one there to present, when you're in a quiet room and you look in the mirror, what do you see? The truth is, many people look in the mirror and don't recognize the person looking back at them. The persona, the mask, was designed to help you live in harmony with the world, but it was never designed to nourish your soul. It may bring recognition, admiration, even power, but it can never bring peace, because it's not you. Think of a moment in your life when you had to smile while your insides were cracking, when you nodded in agreement, even though your heart was screaming in protest, when you tried to please everyone while you were exhausted. Those moments, however small, were the moments when you were falling away from yourself. As time went on, you lost track of what you thought, what you believed because you truly believed, or because you were taught to believe. The dreams you pursued, were they really coming from within, or were they just things you thought you should want? This loss did not happen overnight. It was the result of thousands of days of living in a role, to the point where you forgot who you were before you started acting. Carl Jung warned, when you completely identify with your persona, you are no longer a living person, you are a character, a role, and that role, sadly, you didn't even choose, it was written by someone else. The important question is, if you don't choose that role, whose life are you living, and why do you believe you need to continue to do so? Because deep inside every person, there is a fear of rejection, fear of being lost, fear of being seen for who you really are, and not accepted. And to counter that fear, you put on an armor, a persona, and live in it, as if it were you. But that armor, over time, becomes a prison gilded with recognition, but empty inside. You can go on in that role, your whole life. Many people do. They become parents, they become bosses, they become successful people, but at the end of their lives the question always comes back. If I am not those things, then who am I? And it is from the moment you ask that question seriously that the real journey begins. Persona is not the enemy, it is a tool, but when the tool becomes your identity, you have lost your true self. It is time to separate yourself from the role. It is time to dare to look back. What parts of you have been buried just because you want to be loved? In the next part, we will enter the land that few people dare to face, the place that contains everything you have denied, hidden, thought, not allowed to exist. That is the shadow of the soul. And from there the journey back to the true self begins. If the persona is the mask you wear to be accepted, then the shadow is the part you hide to avoid rejection. And if your mask can make others love you, then your shadow is the part that makes you afraid of yourself. Carl Jung believed that the shadow is not a rare phenomenon, but a part of every human being. It is the place where all the things you do not want to admit about yourself are contained: anger, jealousy, weakness, selfishness, shame, desire, hurt, fear. There are also parts of the shadow that are very beautiful, but have been judged, criticized, or not allowed to exist. Maybe when you were a child, you had a rich imagination, but adults told you it was illusionary. You expressed strong emotions, but were considered too sensitive. You were angry because you were hurt, but were told anger is bad. And little by little you learn a cruel lesson. There are parts of you that need to be hidden, buried, trapped in darkness. But what happens to those rejected parts? They don't disappear. They don't die. Instead, they live silently and persistently in your unconscious. They are the shadow that follows you, influences you, even controls you, even when you don't know it. Ask yourself, have you ever overreacted to a small criticism? Have you ever been jealous of someone without knowing why? Have you ever repeated a self-destructive behavior, even when your mind knows you shouldn't? That's the shadow speaking. The irony is, the more you try to deny your shadow, the more it controls you. Because what is not acknowledged will find a way to manifest, but in the most distorted forms. It may appear as uncontrolled rage, as a habit of self-criticism, as an emotional outburst, as a hidden addiction, or as a lingering emptiness with no apparent cause. Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will continue to rule your life, and you will call it destiny. But here's the important thing. The shadow is not the enemy. It is the rejected part of you that longs to be seen. It is the forgotten life, waiting to be released. In the shadow, there is not only pain, but also untapped potential. Dismissed anger can become a force that protects personal boundaries. Dismissed sensitivity can be the basis of empathy. The desire for control can contain a powerful leadership ability. What you think is darkness is really just light, not properly recognized. That is why Jung believed that facing the shadow is not only necessary for healing, it is also an indispensable step in the process of becoming whole. There is no truth if you only look at the light. There is no understanding of yourself if you ignore the other half that is being rejected. However, the journey to facing the shadow is not easy, because it requires you to put aside your ego, to dare to admit the unpleasant things, that you are not completely good, that you can be selfish, jealous, envious, weak, and that is completely normal. Healing does not come from denying the ugly parts of yourself. It comes from being brave enough to look at them, understand them, and integrate them into your being. It is not about changing into someone else, but about becoming a more complete version of yourself. You may ask, so how do I befriend my shadow? The answer does not come from a formula. It comes from practice. Listen to your feelings honestly, without judgment. Keep an inner journal, not to rationalize, but to really see. Observe your automatic reactions, especially when they are spontaneous. Look at what you hate in others, because that is often the unaccepted shadow within yourself. Every time you dare to accept a part of yourself that has been abandoned, you are one step closer to the truth. Every time you acknowledge something you have previously denied, a part of your soul is set free. The shadow is not darkness to be destroyed, it is light hidden. And only when you dare to step into that darkness can you see clearly the truest light that shines from within. In the next section, we will go to the deeper core of Jungian psychology, the concept of the self, or the true self. It is not a mask you wear, not the shadow you deny, but the whole self, where all the pieces of you, both light and dark, are blended into one living person. After removing the persona mask, after facing and entering the darkness of the shadow, a big question arises: if I am not what I have shown, nor just the parts I have denied, then who am I? Carl Jung called that part the self. It is not a better version of you. It is not a new me. The self is not something you create. It is something that has always been there. You just lost touch with it in the process of growing and integrating. The self is the whole, the union of what you have shown and what you have hidden. It is not on the side of light or darkness, but the center of all opposites within you. In the self, there is strength, but also weakness, reason but also instinct, the desire to grow and the fear of falling apart. When you find the self, you do not become someone else, you finally become yourself. But here is a hard truth. Most of us have never truly lived from the self. Modern life teaches us to be efficient, to meet standards, to control, and to do that, we have to build a social self, to adjust ourselves to fit in, to be recognized. We spend our whole lives trying to become someone, forgetting that what we really need is to return to ourselves. Jung called that process individuation, the journey of separating ourselves from external models, expectations and conditioning, to gradually approach our true inner self. This is not an easy journey, because every step towards the self requires you to face the disguises that you have worn for so long, to the point of thinking they are your own flesh. Individuation is not the same as self-development in the popular sense. It is not becoming a better version. It is not correcting shortcomings to become more successful in the eyes of others. It is an inner journey where you dare to touch both the beautiful and the wounded parts of yourself, to see that both are you. Neither is more noble than the other. And this journey you cannot do superficially, because the self will never reveal itself to an ego that is not ready to face the truth. The truth that many of the things you once believed to be you are actually just roles, that many of the choices you have pursued have not come from the heart, but from fear or expectation, that you may have lived for decades just to please someone, and now you don't know what you really want anymore. Why is the journey to self so difficult? Because it is not just about understanding, it is about unlearning, not about learning more. It is about forgetting, not about becoming someone. It is about daring to be no one. It takes courage to not cling to names, roles, images. You have to accept ambiguity, chaos, and temporary loneliness as the price of finding true unity within. But the magic is, the closer you get to self, the more you feel a kind of freedom that nothing outside can bring. Freedom from the need to prove. Freedom from the burden of being a role model. Freedom from the fear of being judged, of being rejected. Because you are no longer trying to act. You live from a deeper place. A place where you no longer need to be accepted, because you have accepted yourself. And the interesting thing is, it is precisely when you no longer try to please others that you become so genuine that others are naturally drawn to you. You no longer pretend to be the light, but you shine, because the light of someone who has reconciled with the darkness is always stronger and reaches deeper than any artificial light. Self is not a place you reach and then stop. It is a center to which you return over and over again whenever the world pulls you away. Being true to yourself does not mean that you never wear a mask again, or that you are never overwhelmed by the shadow. It means that you are conscious enough to know where you are living from, and brave enough to return every time you lose your way. In the next section, we will delve deeper into a less recognized layer, the system of archetypes, the unconscious archetypes that shape your thoughts, feelings, and actions every day. If you do not understand them, you will forever be guided by invisible forces that you do not even know where they come from. But if you see them clearly, you will for the first time truly take control of your life. We often think of ourselves as the masters of our lives, that all our decisions, emotions, beliefs, and reactions are the result of our own reason and will. But Carl Jung pointed out a more difficult truth. Most of what we do, think, even dream, is guided by invisible forces deep in our unconscious. And in the deepest layer of that unconscious, there is a system that Jung called the collective unconscious. Unlike the personal unconscious, which contains each person's forgotten memories and rejected emotions, the collective unconscious is something you are born with. It does not belong to you as an individual, but is the common spiritual heritage of humanity. It contains primitive models, universal images, symbols, psychological structures that Jung called archetypes. These archetypes are not specific characters, but templates of life experience. They are living symbols hidden deep in the mind, shaping the way you feel, love, fear, fight, sacrifice, rebel, from the moment you are born until the moment you close your eyes. Look at human culture, from ancient legends, Greek mythology, fairy tales, to modern movies. You will always see the repetition of some familiar characters. That is not a coincidence, but a reflection of the archetypes inside the human mind. We all have one or more prominent archetypes within us. It could be the hero, the person who fights through difficulties, always trying to save others, even when they are exhausted. It could be the caregiver, the person who lives for others, sacrifices himself, always feels responsible for the happiness of those around him. Or the rebel, the person who constantly fights against the norm, is ready to break all the rules, sometimes even the things that keep them safe. Or the orphan, the sage, the lover, the explorer. Each archetype carries a different lens through which to view the world, a characteristic response to life experiences. The question is not whether you have an archetype inside you, because everyone has one. It's whether you are aware of it. Because if you don't, it will live for you. Have you ever fallen into the same emotional cycle over and over again, even though you thought you had learned the lesson? Have you ever felt like you were being pushed around by some force, some urge, some habitual reaction, and you couldn't figure out why? That's your archetype at work without you even realizing it. The danger is that when you identify so completely with an archetype, you become misaligned. People who live in the role of hero can take on everything for others until they no longer know how to ask for help. People with the caregiver archetype can sacrifice themselves for their loved ones until they forget they need love too. Archetypes are not wrong, but the imbalance between them makes you no longer yourself, but a pre-programmed role by your subconscious. And like persona and shadow, archetypes do not disappear when you stop looking at them. On the contrary, they become more deeply embedded in your behaviors, emotions, and choices, like a soundtrack you don't recognize, but dance to every day. So, how do you identify the archetypes operating within you? Start with the stories you love, the movies, novels, characters you feel deeply in tune with. They are not just preferences, they are often images of the archetypes living within you. Which character do you identify with most? The rebel, the wanderer, the sage, or the warrior? Which story are you drawn to? The journey of overcoming, the resistance, the sacrifice, or the awakening? In each of these choices, there is an archetype speaking. Next, pay attention to strong emotional reactions, both positive and negative. Archetypes show up not only in likes, but also in resistance. Sometimes what you hate in others is an archetype that you have not integrated. The person who rejects rebels may be repressing their own rebels. The person who criticizes the weaknesses of others may be living in fear of their own fragility. When you recognize the archetypes at work in you, you begin to have a choice. You are no longer being guided by your unconscious. You can choose to live in a more balanced way, opening up space for other archetypes to speak up, and thereby becoming more whole. Jung never advised us to eliminate or suppress any archetype. On the contrary, he believed that healing comes from reconciling the archetypes within, no longer being dominated or dominated by one part. That's when you become the conductor of your inner orchestra, not the musician playing a song whose name you don't know. And that's the crucial stage of the journey to self. Recognizing the shadow is the first step, but understanding your archetypes, the invisible characters that shape the way you live, is the key to stopping living by programming and starting to live consciously. In the next section, we'll face a thorny truth. What happens when you don't take this journey? When you don't integrate the shadow, don't recognize your archetypes, don't return to self. The answer doesn't come in theory, it's in the emptiness, the deadlock, the feeling of lostness that so many people carry in their hearts every day. Together we'll explore the cost of not waking up, and why it's a risk no one should take lightly. Not everyone chooses to journey back to their true selves. And the truth is, most people, even when they feel lost, conflicted, even miserable, continue to live in masks, ignoring the call from within, and thinking that everything will be okay if only they could try a little harder. But there are things that are never okay that way. Carl Jung warned that refusing the process of individuation, that is, the process of returning to the true self, integrating the persona, the shadow and the archetypes, does not make you safer. On the contrary, it leads you to a life that gradually becomes empty, chaotic, and broken from within. Look at modern life. How many people are living according to the right pattern, the right norm, the right expectation, but every morning they wake up feeling heavy, soulless, tired. How many people are successful on the outside, have everything others want, but feel empty on the inside, as if they are living in someone else's body? That emptiness is not accidental. It is the result of a neglected soul. When you are not true to yourself, your soul will find ways to speak up. At first, it is a feeling of restlessness, confusion, lack of direction. Then comes negative emotions for no apparent reason, loss of motivation, anxiety, even depression. Then at some point, the body also begins to speak up, with pain, illness, and prolonged fatigue that medicine cannot explain. Jung called these symptoms of non-individuation, that is a deviation, a fragmentation in the soul, because you have strayed too far from your true self. You have lived too long in an unsuitable role. You have denied your inner shadow. You are dominated by archetypes without even knowing it. And so, the unconscious, the part you can't control, starts to take over. The scary thing is, people who live in this state often don't know they're stuck. They think the problem is with their job, their lover, their circumstances, so they try to change everything on the outside, but then find everything repeats itself. They change jobs, still bored, love someone new, still stuck, become more successful, but still not enough, because the root is not what's outside, it's inside, in the fact that you've lost touch with yourself. And when this inner disconnection persists, it creates a self-destructive loop. Some people rush into toxic relationships, as if their subconscious is trying to relive the old pain so they can finally heal, but they don't know how. Some people sabotage themselves every time they're about to succeed, because deep down they don't believe they're worthy, a belief that stems from an unseen shadow. Some people are addicted, demanding, controlling, because that is how they try to fill the void of their forgotten selves. And there is a form of suffering that is even more dangerous than the obvious manifestations. It is a silent but lifeless existence, when you still smile, still go to work, still do everything right. But you know, there is no fire in you. Everything is just duty, repetition, acting. Jung believed that the lack of awareness leads to an even more dangerous hidden consequence: vague, nameless resentment. Resentment at society, at family, at oneself. Resentment at not being oneself. But because one is not aware of the underlying cause, that anger can turn into criticism of others, or turn back into depression, self-blame, self-harm. And then one lives one's whole life without ever knowing what it feels like to truly be oneself. But the wonderful thing is, even when you have gone too far, you can still turn back. Every sign of emptiness, of pain, of repetition is not a failure. It is a reminder that there is a part of you waiting for you to find it again. A part that has never disappeared. You have just turned your back on it for too long. To end that cycle, to live fully, instead of just existing, you need to do one thing: have the courage to turn inward. Not to judge, right or wrong, just to listen. And then gradually, naturally, the buried parts will begin to speak. Not to hurt you, but to bring you back. In the next part, and also the last part of this journey, we will ask the biggest question: what is it, after all, to live authentically? When we no longer wear masks, are no longer controlled by the shadow, are no longer running after external scenarios, what is left? Let's explore what a real life looks like. A life you choose, a life worth living. Authenticity is not a destination, it is a process. It is not a moment of awakening that changes everything forever. It is small steps, quiet choices, and moments when you dare to return to yourself, in a world that demands you to be someone else. Authenticity begins when you stop chasing after the image of a successful person, a good person, a strong person, and instead you start asking yourself, what is real to me right now? What is real when I don't need to impress? When I don't need to please? When I no longer fear rejection? Jung never promised that the path to true self would be easy. On the contrary, he called it the hero's journey, where you don't fight the outside world, but face the shadows, conflicts, fears, and illusions within. But it is the arduousness that makes the journey worthwhile, because there is nothing more sacred than a person who dares to be authentic, in a world that lives by pretending. When you are authentic, you no longer need to be perfect. You no longer try to make people like you. You no longer force yourself into a mold. Instead, you become raw, real, full, sometimes strong, sometimes fragile, sometimes confident, sometimes skeptical. But in any state, you are still yourself. No acting, no denying, no judging. The wonderful thing is, when you are authentic, you not only free yourself, you free those around you. Because authenticity has a natural healing power. When you dare to live from self, from your whole being, you show others that they can do the same, that they don't have to pretend to be loved, that they don't have to act to be accepted. Every conversation you have begins to feel like a real connection. Every choice you make has a deeper meaning. Every action you take, no matter how small, is the full presence of a person living in the true direction of their soul. But living authentically does not mean living selfishly. It does not mean I am who I am, and whoever doesn't like me is fine. On the contrary, living authentically is the courage to see yourself clearly, to understand yourself so well that you no longer need to defend your ego with stubbornness. You no longer have to fight to prove anything. You just need to live. And that life, when it comes from self, naturally radiates peace and strength. You will begin to realize very simple things, but you used to forget that silence is not as scary as you think. That sadness is not the enemy. That emotions do not need to be controlled. They just need to be listened to. And that deep within all the fluctuations of life, there is always an unchanging support, your true self, always present, always waiting for you to return. Living authentically doesn't guarantee that you won't get hurt again, but it does guarantee that every pain you experience will have meaning, that every wound is a door leading you deeper into yourself. And every time you overcome a fear, you take off another layer of disguise to get closer to your true self. And then, little by little, you no longer live to become someone. You live to express yourself, not for anyone, not because you have to, just because you know, if you're not yourself, what's the point of living? When you live from self, you don't need a big reason to exist, because your existence, in its truest form, is already a value. You no longer need to chase after goals just to fill the void. You no longer search outside for what has always been inside. And that is freedom. So if, during this journey, something within you begins to stir, a tiny whisper, a desire to dig deeper, to stop and listen, don't ignore it. That's your true self speaking. You don't have to do anything big right away. Just start by being a little more honest with yourself every day. Slow down, observe, listen, peel away the masks, look into the shadows, recognize the archetypes that speak, and then step by step, you will return, not to someone else, but to yourself, fully. This journey has no end, but every step is worth it, because there is no journey more sacred than the journey back to yourself. And if you have come this far, not out of superficial curiosity, but with a heart that truly wants to understand, then know that you have begun. This journey is yours, and it's just getting started.